I can't give you anything but love, baby. That's the only thing I've plenty of, baby. Dream a while, scheme a while, we're sure to find happiness. And I guess all those things you've always
It is indeed. Well, there's a lot of confusion about that, and it even confuses film scholars, but yes, it is definitely a screwball comedy. A romantic comedy does share traits with the screwball comedy, the relationship conflict, and the witty dialogue, the happy ending, but the structure is very different. A romantic comedy has a traditional love story with, there's melodrama and sentiment in it. The characters are earnest. You normally will have a heroic male who is overcoming obstacles, and then he will win the girl at the end, and she will complete him. And there's no use of irony in romantic comedy. The screwball comedy is very different than that. It's by its nature, it's a satire. It satirizes relationships, marriage, traditional institutions. It satirizes the wealthy. The conflict is shown through sexually antagonistic dialogue and conflict, the battle of the sexes. And you see a lot of anti-heroic behavior, such as here, if you look at the men in the Philadelphia story, we have C. Dexter Haven, the husband, is an alcoholic. The father is an adulterer. The fiance is a social climber. And then you have the very sarcastic reporter. So these are definitely not your traditional love story attributes.
Yeah, Mac the Night Watchman is a prince among men, and Uncle Willie is a pincher.
Oh, thank you. Even more. Yes, indeed.
So how does this fall on the spectrum of screwball comedy? It feels, compared to the last time we saw Cary Grant and Katherine Hepburn together and Bringing Up Baby, it's very different. How do you feel about the spectrum there?
It is. The pacing is quite different. In Bringing Up Baby, the pace is breakneck. The dialogue is so fast, there's chaos going, and this movie takes a very leisurely pace, but the pace does not change the structure. It does not negate the fact that it's a screwball comedy. It is on the other end of the spectrum, though, between the two.
And the dialogue is just as witty.
Yes, definitely.
And Cary Grant's performance is so different in this than Bringing Up Baby.
Isn't it, though? You'll often read or hear people say, well, Cary Grant, he's only just playing Cary Grant in all his movies. And that couldn't be farther from the truth. If you compare his performance in Bringing Up Baby, where he plays the paleontologist, of course he personifies the absent-minded professor. He's befuddled the whole time. And he's playing someone who's so out of step. He's one step behind all the other characters in the action. And here you have Cary Grant playing C. Dexter Haven as suave, sophisticated. He is a sardonic observer of the others. He's grounding the other characters. And with his wit, he is sarcastic and he mocks, certainly. But very, very different indeed. And it just shows what a remarkable actor he was. And his very large range. Truly, truly.
So the whole plot of this film it still feels relevant with the tabloid reporters and the media access.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the issue of remarriage is a big element in this film and in screwball comedy. The remarriage, if you recall, we talked before in the series about how morality was being legislated with the criminalization of alcohol use. These religious organizations had persuaded Congress to enact prohibition. So that was a 13-year experiment that failed. They also, religious organizations had lobbied legislatures across the country to make divorce a moral issue. And so as a consequence, it was very unusual for people to get divorces, but as women obtained freedoms, They first got the vote in 1920, then they were allowed to drive, then they were permitted to start entering society and working. The professions were not open to them, medicine, law, architecture. However, they could achieve some financial independence through teaching, nursing, or secretarial work. And so as they achieved freedoms, women started to push back on the morality issue of divorce, and they started seeking it out more frequently. Writers were able to seize upon that. It's such a wonderful device. You see it used throughout screwball comedy because writers enable you to delve much deeper into relationships. When you have youngsters that are dating, the conflicts are going to be fairly limited and shallow. But when you have people in long-term relationships, then when you have divorce, you can really explore a person's personal issues, their failures, their shortcomings, which is of course what satire is all about. And the writers were also able to avoid the censorship rules against adultery because the person's no longer married. Therefore, they can explore other relationships. And that's all part of the screwball comedy, the journey for self-discovery. And you are learning about yourself through your relationships with others while you're divorced. And then, of course, you remarry at the end.
Yeah, you get the romantic happy ending after all.
Exactly, and there are many famous screwball comedies. Philadelphia Story is certainly one. The Awful Truth is another. The Ex-Mrs. Bradford, hilarious.
His Girl Friday.
Yes, His Girl Friday, of course, very famous example. So,
but you can see her on June 4th.
a little plug there for the film series.
Well, and speaking of the alcohol again and prohibition, the last film that we watched was The Thin Man, which is delightfully boozy. This one too.
Yes, you'll find alcohol is woven into plots throughout screwball comedy for a couple of reasons. A hallmark of screwball comedy is erratic, eccentric, oddball, nutty behavior, and alcohol fuels that. Inhibitions are lower, people act zany and crazy, and so it's natural to put that in. It's a very easy way for writers to put in how someone ends up acting very bizarrely. In the Philadelphia Story, it's also quite effectively used because what it does is it allows the development of the relationship between Tracy and the reporter to be fast-tracked. Their inhibitions are lowered, so they're getting to know each other real fast. And so over this night of revelry, which of course leads to her transformation. So very good use of alcohol. I mean, they're intoxicated on the champagne and they're intoxicated on each other.
Oh, that scene is just, it's just so spectacular, and it's such a relief in a way too, when when she's just been so verbally torn down, and that moment is it's gorgeous, for one thing, it's just the aesthetics of the champagne and the radio and the fountain and that Adrienne gown, it's just spectacular, but the writing, the dialogue, it just gives me goosebumps every time.
It really does.
Yeah.
It's Donald Ogden Stewart outdid himself on the screenplay, and of course Philip Berry from the original play. Just outstanding. And screwball comedy, the cornerstone of screwball comedy is that dialogue. That's key. It's key to everything.
And George Cukor.
Yes. Outstanding director.
What an icon of cinema.
He directed 50 films. He directed Katherine Hepburn in 10 films.
Wow.
He was the highest paid director at MGM.
Really?
And over his career, MGM was during the Hollywood's golden age, it was the greatest, the most prestigious studio. So he was at the top of the heap for sure. He was known as a woman's director. MGM had coined that term as a compliment to him because he had coaxed so many outstanding performances out of women. However, that transitioned into being something very insulting. What the implication was later was, oh, he doesn't have the right stuff to direct men, only women. He's a woman's director. And so it was a backhanded insult. And it couldn't be further from the truth because George Cukor did direct more men to Academy Award-winning performances for Best Actor than any other director, a record that still stands today.
Oh, wow.
So you see the perceptions there. There
And
is,
I have to ask, I have heard that he was homosexual. Was that an issue? Was he ever was he openly gay, or was it just whispered because he was the women's director?
well, this is Joseph Mankiewicz, the producer of this film. He wrote about George Cukor that Cukor neither suppressed his sexuality or hid it, nor did he wear it on his lapel. So he was discreet about his life, but it was well known that he was a homosexual. I mean, he did succeed in Hollywood to the top ranks of Hollywood. That said, there is the elephant in the room that has to be discussed when you mention George Cukor, and that is he was fired from the biggest film of them all, and if you adjust for inflation in today's dollars, the most successful film of all time, Gone with the Wind.
Mm-hmm.
After being the director during pre-production for 2 years, when they got into principal photography, shortly after starting, the producer David O. Selznick did fire Cukor and then replaced him with Victor Fleming. It is reputed the scuttlebutt around Hollywood, and that still remains to this day, is that he was fired because Clark Gable refused to work with a homosexual director and had him fired. However, the research doesn't really support that. It's been picked up in several scholarly treatises. However, David O. Selznick was an inveterate memo writer, and he wrote that even just during pre-production, he was quite concerned about Cukor, that Cukor maybe wasn't a good fit for this epic movie, Gone with the Wind, and he considered very early on replacing him with Victor Fleming. Also, Clark Gable had worked with George Cukor on Manhattan Melodrama in 1934 without any issue. And also, Clark Gable was the biggest movie star. He was the king, after all. And when he negotiated his contract for Gone with the Wind, had he not wanted to work with George Cukor, he could have easily said, I'd like another director. I mean, he had that kind of power. It would have been, of course. And he didn't. So I don't know if the facts support that scuttlebutt.
Interesting. Well, this is kind of a comeback for him too. I mean, right after that sort of humiliation of being fired from the biggest film of the decade.
It's true. And it's our gain as the movie audience, because but for him being fired from Gone with the Wind, he wouldn't have directed The Women, and he wouldn't have directed this film, The Philadelphia Story. So
it all worked out.
But it did kind of hang over him. It was certainly a little dark cloud there over him that disturbed him personally.
Well, I went into a bit about Katherine Hepburn and kind of how she came into this role and this play, but I would love to hear what you have to share about it.
You did. You gave excellent background on her. She came to Hollywood from theater, and George Cukor performed a screen test for her when she first got to RKO, and he immediately saw her potential, that she photographed beautifully. She was incredibly photogenic, and she just projected on the screen, even in a screen test. He immediately put her in a movie as the star, The Bill of Divorcement in 1932, opposite John Barrymore. So she hit the ground running. It was a major hit. She went from that. She went to other hit after hit, Alice Adams. She received the Academy Award for Morning Glory. She did Little Women. She could do no wrong until she did wrong. And then there were a series of flops. It started Quality Street, and then Sylvia Scarlett. And it was film after film, even Bringing Up Baby, as you mentioned in your introduction. That initially, it's now a classic, it's a masterpiece, but upon its initial release, it was a flop. And she played in the lead role, Christopher Strong. That was a flop. So she left. She had negotiated an incredible contract with RKO, where she received a percentage of profits in addition to a very substantial salary as a newcomer in Hollywood. It was unheard of at that point. She was a tenacious businesswoman, and as you mentioned, she did have an equity position in the play, Philadelphia Story, and she went toe-to-toe with Louis B. Mayer at MGM, and she negotiated for the screen adaptation of the play to this film that we saw today, and did an incredible job with it. On a personal level, she was raised on the East Coast to a very liberal family. Her father was a doctor. Her mother was a suffragette, very involved in women's rights, women's reproductive rights. She worked with Margaret Sanger on birth control. Katherine Hepburn, in her memoirs, talked about the dinner table conversations. Nothing was off limits. Everything was discussed. And she came in being so independent, self-determined, confident. Some people interpret that as arrogance, but she was the quintessential screwball heroine.
She's just a force of nature in this film too. She's spectacular.
That's the only thing I've plenty of, baby. Dream a while, scheme a while, we're sure to find happiness. And I guess all those things you've always pined for. Gee, I'd like to see you looking swell, baby. Diamond bracelets Woolworth doesn't sell, baby. Till that lucky day, you know darn well, baby, I can't give you anything but love.